A little bit more about my background here in a little bit, but I've been working for uh, I don't know, 25 years now, 26 years, um, building personal assistants and other stuff too. But everyone cares about personal assistants these days, and people have been asking me, well, now that we've got, I've got Alexa and I've got Siri, I've got, Bixby or Cortana or OK Google or whatever. I've got all these devices in my home. It feels like we're done. They work pretty well. There's nothing more to do. And so they asked me, well, can you say anything about, why aren't you retired? I mean, what is there still to do? And so that's what I want to talk about today. But really, it's going to be a talk about predicting the future of technology generally, disguised as a talk about speech and NLP kinds of technology, which in turn is disguised as a talk about me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, my history in developing speech technology. But in the end, I don't really care if you come out of here knowing that, oh, Jeff has been doing speech for 26 years or whatever. What I really care about is that you come out with an idea about how we look forward in speech and language processing and technology more broadly. All right, so that's my goal. And you tell me when we're done. You tell me if I've gotten that point across. Okay. I am. I'm going to pretend that you guys are all listening and nodding your heads at appropriate times, but I think everybody is hiding their video. So I'll just have to imagine that. So here's where we are now, where we have personal assistants in our homes, and we ask, what's next? I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to predict that this experience is going to get better, and that the interactions are going to be more natural. You'll be able to converse more fluidly, more naturally. Right now, things have to kind of fit certain patterns. If I ask Siri or Alexa or Google something that's not quite the way they expected it, it's pretty easy to trip it up. But I think that's going to get better, and I think it'll spread into more places. So I think that you'll be talking to, your refrigerator, your toaster, your car, your air conditioner, your whatever. You're going to talk to lots of things, and they'll talk back, and maybe they'll be connected in some useful way to each other, and so forth. Well, all right. So that's my bold prediction. Are you guys familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? Anyone working in tech should be, especially if they're on any sort of consumer or product kind of side of things, should be familiar with the hype cycle. So the Gartner group is this consulting group that evaluates different technologies and companies who are producing those technologies to try to figure out, are they, on the verge of being widely accepted or whatever. And they have this way of looking at the world and technology in particular that says when a new technology enters the market or enters the space, it's here on the left on their hype cycle. There's an innovation trigger. Someone invents something. I captured this picture 3.5 years ago, so it's a little bit old. You could argue about whether things are in the right place, but something like smart dust was still is very new, and it's easy for people to get very excited about it. Like, oh, that's going to save the world. We'll use smart dust to block out the sun strategically to counteract global warming, or whatever. And so if you look at all of these technologies, and you can see right at the top of the curve up here, 3.5 years ago was deep learning, machine learning, cognitive computing, things that conversational user interfaces, things that we're kind of working in, and that you guys are preparing to work in, and and so the idea is that you get to this point for things where there's a peak of inflated expectations, and then when people realize that it's not as that that it doesn't solve all the problems, or there are challenges, or it's not just the answer to a simple answer to all of life's difficulties. Um, in the expectations of the public, it falls down into this trough of disillusionment. But then over time, it starts to claw its way back up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity, and it finds a place where it's where things are useful, and they find their place in our products and the way we use things. Like take for example a smartphone, which 11 something years ago didn't exist, and then it was introduced, and you can sort of see how it was super. It rose up um, that first part of the curve pretty quickly, and then it did fall down. People started complaining about their smartphones, and well, they're a hassle. They don't solve all my problems, but now they've kind of climbed back up to where they've people have learned to work with them, and they're just part of people's lives, and we have neither inflated nor deflated expectations of them, that we just kind of gotten to know them. So when you're thinking about predicting the future, you have to kind of keep in mind that wherever you are, there's going to be this tendency that early on you might have overly high expectations of what things are going to do for you, and then after some point you might have under expectations of what they're going to do for you, and you have to just kind of temper your expectations in that way. Any questions about this sort of concept, the hype curve? All right, so a problem with trying to make predictions. Well, there's a problem. Yogi Berra, famous baseball player, I call him a baseball philosopher. He's quoted a lot, often for saying things that are sort of overly obvious or sound silly in retrospect. Like, for example, he said, "Oh, nobody goes to that restaurant anymore. It's too crowded." So here he says, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. The problem is that we predict the future by extending the present. We reframe the question in terms of, how is my current experience going to change? So like when I showed you the picture 2 slides ago of an Alexa in someone's kitchen, you think, how is the future going to change? You think, oh, how is that interaction? How is Alexa? How is the personal assistant kind of interaction going to change going forward? But in fact, the future usually surprises us. And I'll talk a little bit about how does the future surprise us? What does that mean exactly? It's a little bit like driving your car at night. And you can see with your headlights, you can see what's right in front of you. You can even see that the road is curving to the left in this case. You may know something about the road, you've driven it before or whatever, but in fact, you don't really know what's beyond your headlights around the corner. You don't know if there's a car broken down. You don't know if there's something that's going to cause a detour or whatever. And if you haven't already driven on that road, you really don't know what to expect in the future. And that's how I view our journey into the future of technology, is that it's like driving a car with your headlights at night. You can kind of see where you're going. You can see well enough to stay on the road, but you really don't know what's happening too far down the road. Let me say a little bit about myself. So I spent, before I started my current company, I spent 20 years helping computers understand the words that people speak. So I spent the first half of my career at Nuance, where I worked on products like Dragon Naturally Speaking. If you're familiar with them, it's software that you would use on your computer to dictate emails and documents and so forth. And I worked really hard on that. It was a lot of fun, but it was focused on dictation. I left there after 13 years to go work for a little company called Yap, where our focus was voicemail transcription, converting voicemail to text, so that if someone left you a voicemail, you could get a text message about it. And then that company was actually acquired by Amazon as the foundation for the Alexa team. And that's how I ended up running the Alexa team at Amazon for 3 years in the early days until we launched. And so what happened, I have to tell you this. So 8 years ago it was a little more than 8 years ago. It was like 9 years ago in a locked conference room in Seattle. So they acquired our company, Yap, and we were, I was part of some of those discussions about, okay, you can acquire us, what are we going to do for you? And they said, we can't tell you. They had these plans for Alexa. At the time, there was no similar kind of thing, a fixed location personal assistant. The closest you come was maybe Siri. But Siri is very different. Siri is tied to a person, and so it's like always you talking to Siri, whereas the thing that Amazon envisioned was like tied to a particular location in your house, and everybody coming and going would talk to it, and they would talk to it from a distance. I'll say a little bit more about that problem also in a little bit. But they wouldn't tell us why they wouldn't tell us about the Alexa vision when they were acquiring our company. They bought the company, and through all the negotiations and the discussions, which went on for months, I kept asking them, so what are we going to do? Do we have the right technology? Do we have what we need? And they said, we hope so, but we can't talk about it. We won't talk about it till after the deal is signed. So after the deal was signed, I called them up and I said, so what do you want us to do? And they said, we can't tell you. We will only tell you in person. And so they flew all of us to Seattle, to the Amazon headquarters, and they got us all there. They locked us in a conference room and closed the exterior blinds and locked the door and put something over the door so no one could look in the little window on the door. And they swore us again to secrecy, even though we'd already signed documents that we wouldn't say any secrets or whatever. And then they described the vision of Alexa, which was a little bit different at the time, but it was basically your current, the vision for a current Amazon Echo device. And they described it for us, and they were excited, and they said, "What do you think?" And I was kind of heartbroken, actually, because the technology of the day could not handle that. Speech recognition. Nobody knew how to get speech recognition to work over a distance. It could work fine from a close microphone, but the problem over a distance is if I'm in my room here and I'm speaking to Alexa, which is on the other side of the room, or heaven forbid, out in the hall or in the next room over or something, my voice doesn't just go straight from my mouth to the microphone. It does that, but it also takes different paths. And so another copy of my voice will bounce off the window and hit the microphone a little bit later, or the ceiling, or the wall, or my computer monitor, or whatever. And so the microphones pick up, 5 or 10 copies of what I'm saying, each one shifted in time, each one with a little bit different audio properties because of how it's, what it bounced off of or whatever. And so after they told us what we were doing, I said, they said, are you excited? What are we going to, what's going to happen? Or, how are we going to go forward? And I said, look, I got to tell you that we can't do what you want to do. You bought this company, and I wish you'd have told us, because we can't do this. And they said, yeah, no, we don't say that at Amazon. Instead, you need to tell us what it's going to take to get there. And I kind of kicked myself, and I realized, oh yeah, that's right. And I learned this lesson. Don't say it can't be done, right? Maybe the current technology is not there, but look, that's what that's what we do in this industry is we solve problems that haven't been solved before, and we figure out what it's going to take. In this case, for Alexa, it took a massive data collection project. It took me hiring like 60, 70 speech and NLP scientists over 3 years, and lots of computing power. And it took several things that were not that weren't there before. It coincidentally, fortunately, this happened right after the revolution in deep neural networks or multi-layer perceptrons that allowed us to do the modeling that was too difficult to do beforehand. And so here's what I want to. Here's one of the things that I want to let you know is don't be passive about where the future is taking you. Don't say it can't be done or we're not there yet. You have to realize that you're in control, at least partly you're in control. And so when someone just, when you have a vision and you don't know how you're going to solve it, don't ask yourself, oh, will I be able to do it? But you can ask yourself, what's it going to take to do that? And so that's a lesson that I learned at Amazon. Does anyone have any questions about my experience at Amazon or anything else that I've been talking about? I don't even know if you guys are really there.
Well, you mentioned that the vision for Alexa back then was like pretty similar to what it is now. What would you say is like the biggest difference between the vision at that point and now?
Well, two things. When they first described it, they described it to me that it would be a device that would sit on your kitchen counter or whatever, that would be about the size of a Coke can, and that it would cost maybe $10. So they had this idea that it was going to be a small, cheap device. But and there are Alexa devices now that are cheaper and that are smaller, not exactly the form factor of a Coke can, but over when we first launched Alexa in 2014, but over the course of developing it, we realized that a big use case was going to be playing music for people, and that you couldn't get any high fidelity audio out of a really small, cheap device. And so for the first Alexa and for the first year, really, you had to spend like over $100, and it was a bigger device, looked more like a can of tennis balls than a Coke can. So that's probably the biggest difference, was just the idea of whether it was going to be super cheap and small, so that people would just buy a dozen of them for their house. But beyond that, it was pretty close. We spent a lot of time trying to brainstorm amongst ourselves and anticipate, what are people going to ask it to do? Is it just going to be music? Is it going to be, is playing music going to be like 30% of it, but they're also going to be asking about, what time is it? No, people are not going to spend, they're not going to ask Alexa what time it is, because they have watches or clocks or whatever, so they're not going to waste their time with that. But I don't know about you, if you have an Alexa, I think half of the things that in our household that we say to Alexa are, what time is it? Just because, I can't see it well. Also, we don't have clocks that often. And I used to wear a watch, but I don't wear a watch anymore. I have a smartphone. And if my smartphone's in my pocket, I don't want to be bothered to pull it out. I'll ask what time it is, or what's the weather, or things, or when I'm cooking, I set timers with it, things like that. So we spent a lot of time back then in 2014, 2015, 2016, trying to kind of brainstorm and talk amongst ourselves about how would you use this? How would it be useful? And I think we mostly had the right intuitions there. I mean, there were some things, like I say, like telling the time, that surprised us. Did I answer your question there, Rohan?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think at launch the Echo costed a lot more, but they've really reduced the price. Now it's something like $20-$25. So they're getting there.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, you can get the Alexa app on your smartphone, and it's free. You can just talk to you can talk to Alexa on your smartphone or on your Kindle tablet or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks.
yeah. Cool. So,
Jeff, one more question.
yeah.
Could you say something about the effect that the deep learning revolution had on the construction of Alexa? I mean, do you think they could have built all of the speech recognition and audio processing using traditional methods? Maybe it would have just taken a bit longer? Or is there just something really fundamental about deep learning which made it possible, and it might not have been possible with the old methods?
I think, you know, I just said, don't ever say it's impossible, but
Okay.
I have no idea how we would have done it without deep learning. Deep learning methods for acoustic modeling, in particular, which is the non-NLP side of speech recognition. Deep learning methods allow you, with sufficient data, with all the right properties, allow the system to learn variation that we just didn't have a way to model otherwise.
Mhm.
So as long as I said there was a massive data collection. Let me describe that in 30 seconds or so. So we rented homes through like Verbo or these like home rental sites. We rented homes all around the country, and we hired people to come in, and we didn't tell them what they were doing or why they were doing it, but we had hidden prototype echo models all around the house where they were, and we said, look, stand here and read these things, and the things would be, play some music or what's on television or whatever, and we would collect the audio, the recordings from all of these devices simultaneously, and at the same time we would be doing that in like 10 or 12 different rooms, and it would be running 12 hours a day for 6 months, so that we collected just massive hundreds of thousands of hours of different people speaking different things in different settings. And because of that, we had all sorts of variation in the speakers, in the echo properties of the room, and the things that they were saying, and that allowed us, with all of that data, without DNNs, I have no idea how we would have modeled that. It seems beyond me. But DNNs are really good at modeling variation, and so we were able to build models that are pretty darn accurate. All of that data became useless like a week after we launched. Well, not useless, but certainly not very valuable, because suddenly we had massively more amounts of real data from real people using these devices, and so they're able to train from that data, retrain the models.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was going to be a follow-up question. It sounds like this is only something you need to do once.
Yeah.
And then with other companies, do you think they did a similar thing, or were they able to leverage other companies' resources for that data?
I think they did similar things. Whether they, exactly how they collected that data, like the data that Amazon collected is completely proprietary. They didn't share that with Google or anyone else. And so other people would have had to find a way to get their own reverberant speech data. That's what we call it when the speech is bouncing off of things. They had to get their own reverberant speech data from whatever sources, and so they had various kinds of data collections, and I think different companies approached it slightly differently, but still, there's no substitute for getting a lot of data. All right, so I went to a show, a trade show, like a year ago, and it was billed as, what's exciting in speech, what's going on in speech and voice technology. And I was a little dismayed when I got there that everyone was thinking about Alexa and Google, OK Google, and asking,
According to Wikipedia,
do you know what?
Google is a multinational corporation from the United
Alexa,
States
stop.
of America.
Let's. I usually remember to turn her off before a presentation, but at this show, that's all anyone was talking about was like skills and applications and uses for these personal devices, and I thought that's really these people have blinders on. That like Alexa or whatever is a blinder to them, that's all they can see. Is if they think of voice technology, that's all they can see. But it's a lot more than that. And I have to ask myself every once in a while, what are my blinders? What are the things making me say, hey, look, that's not possible, we can't do that? But really it's preventing me from seeing other possibilities in my peripheral vision. So there's a little bit of an irony there that as something like Alexa catches on, it can restrict our vision for other things that are not right there, that are not in the periphery, that are in the periphery rather. So the smart speaker technology is a blessing and a curse. So here's 8 points that why it's a kind of a curse. So if you look at, whether it's Amazon or Google or Bixby or Cortana or Siri or whatever, it's a closed and controlled system. You don't have access to the raw audio if you're trying to do something interesting. I'll explain one reason I care about that. One of the projects that we've been working on is to detect disease from people's speech. Can I detect that you have Parkinson's disease by the way your speech, warbles or whatever? But you can't do that. You can't address that with Alexa because Alexa doesn't give you the audio. It'll only tell you the words that someone said, and so you can't use these smart speakers for a lot of applications that I would like. There are privacy issues, including just like banks and medical hospitals and so forth, and financial institutions and legal institutions. They won't use smart speakers for applications because they're worried about, first of all, having to speak everything out loud, but then secondly, that's going over the internet through, who knows exactly how well it's being protected, being stored on someone else's server. There's limited ability to take initiative that like with Alexa, there's no way for the system to jump out at you and say, oh, I just learned that this is happening. What do you want me to do or whatever? The NLU is really restricted. Everything comes down to intents and entities. But a lot of things that we say are not intents and entities. If you analyze a conversation between two people, it's not just all about intents and entities. It's tied to specific hardware. There's a limited choice of what it sounds like. There's limitations on the language. I'm working with a group building speech recognition for Cambodian, for example, that there's, Cambodian doesn't really have speech recognition right now. And I just, this morning, I was in a conference for chatbots in Africa, and there's so many languages that just have no speech technology support at all. So anyway, all these things, a lot of things that I'd like to work on, a lot of things I'd like to offer to people, you can't necessarily do it through a smart speaker. So in 2014, I founded a new speech company, actually a new kind of speech company, and the idea is we hire smart people who know something about speech and NLP, and then we let our customers tell us what to work on, as opposed to the more traditional approach. If you're founding a company, is you figure out what is the thing you're going to build, and then you build it and you hope people buy it. But in our case, we said, no, we're not going to decide what we're going to build. We're going to say, look, we can build anything you want, and then our customers come to us. And sure enough, we did. We had customers come to us asking for a bunch of different things. And over the years, over the last 6 years, we've had all sorts of people asking us for this, that, and the other. And it's given us this really unique insight into where the technology is going and what we might do with it. So here's our company, Cobalt Speech and Language. We're not huge. We're about 20, 25 people. But we're all people who, for the most part, most of the people in this picture have a master's or a PhD in speech processing or natural language processing or something related to that. And most of them have a handful of years, or some of them many years of experience on the job in building these kinds of things. We're a virtual company. Everybody works from home. And this is an old slide. I think we're up to 6 countries now. We occasionally get together for a week at a time, like this picture that I just showed you. We all work from home all around the world. We don't have an office, but here we all got together in Orlando, Florida for a week last March, actually. It was just a year ago right now. And that's the last time we got together, as you might guess. And we get together and we do a week-long workshop where we work on stuff together and bond. And I mentioned we have this affiliated company, Canary Speech, that we founded 2 years after Cobalt. That's an independent company that is analyzing speech, both the acoustic patterns of speech, but also the lexical patterns for clues that might indicate different kinds of disease conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression, concussion, and so forth. So more generally, stepping back, here's my history in the field. I mentioned that I worked for Nuance and worked on Dragon, went to Yap. I already said all of this. Went to Amazon, and then I founded Cobalt. Yeah, that's a repeat slide. All right, does anyone have any questions about what I've talked about so far, about Cobalt, about the idea of what these smart speakers can do or can't do, and what we're trying to do about that here? All right, so at Cobalt, our goal is to move beyond those limitations. So we build speech and NLP technology that people can host themselves, that we do this kind of analytics to analyze things about the speaker. We have our own custom text-to-speech. We can work on alternate hardware. We have novel interfaces, yada, yada, yada. So that is, whenever anyone calls me and says, look, I have this idea, can you do this? Before they even describe it, I want to say, yeah, we can do it. We just have to figure out how much it's going to cost. I learned my lesson. See, I don't say it's not possible anymore. I say, yeah, it's just going to be a matter of how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. I'll give you 3 examples of projects that we've worked on. So one, people who are hearing impaired, they can get these captioning phones. And my father has one, for example. They have these captioning phones where everything when I call my dad, everything I say, he gets captions. He can read what I'm saying. And the system doesn't do that for him. It assumes I can hear him just fine. And so we are working with companies to improve that experience, because you can't. We actually take a hybrid approach where we have speech recognition results, and then a human corrects that pretty rapidly. We have another customer. Actually, we have like 5 customers that are doing some form of language learning, and they're using our technology to give feedback to the students on their accent. So let's say you're learning English as a second language, or you're learning Spanish, or whatever, and you can practice, and the technology will give you feedback to say, well, you didn't pronounce that word correctly, or you used the wrong form of that verb, or whatever. And that's a challenge. And then here's another one that we've got a project actually just recently ramping up for people doing maintenance. They have these augmented reality glasses that they can speak to, that serves as a sort of a live visual manual for repairing or maintaining this jet engine or whatever they're trying to do. And so it'll show them what they're doing, and they can ask questions like, where's the fuse box, or where does the red wire connect to, or whatever. And so they can carry on a dialogue with it. And so these are just 3 examples that I kind of picked at random, but I realized after I picked them, all 3 of them are good examples of something that you can't do that with a smart speaker. A smart speaker is not going to solve those problems, really. So at Cobalt, we do anything that people ask us to do, but over the years, that's mostly fallen into these 7 buckets, and so we and so we now offer these just as products that people can just license from us and use. So the first sort of our flagship is Cubic. It's our speech to text, our speech recognizer. And we support 8 languages. It can be telephone speech or in-person, high quality speech. It can also be far-field speech. We also do text to speech, so that the system can speak back to you. Chosun and Diatheke are our NLU and dialogue manager systems, so that those first 4 lines all together, you can put those together into like a natural language spoken interface. We also have biometrics to recognize who's speaking, speaker characterization, or analytics to detect things like how old you are you male or female, are you sick, where are you from, or things like that. When we speak, we quickly recognize things about the speaker from the way they speak. And then we also have a word spotter, a keyword and phrase spotter that you might use, for example, to index millions of hours of videos, and then be able to type, I'm looking for when someone mentioned, Ratnaparki or whatever, and then they have to go, you have to find that. All right, and when people work with us, they're usually taking some existing technology, and then they pay us for some new development. Okay, any questions? I'm about to switch gears and talk a little bit about speech recognition without going too deep into the weeds.
Yeah. So for like a company that's not, Amazon or Google, who naturally have access to a lot of data, how much of a problem or how difficult is it for you to collect your data for these new products, especially like you're dealing with languages that there might not be much out there?
Yeah. So that's a good question, Phil. We are that's always the first part of every discussion we have with a customer. Someone says, I want this thing. And we take stock of, well, do we already have models that will do what they need to do, or do we need to build new models, and do we need to collect some data? And so we'll ask them. Like someone recently, just today, was asking me about, they want to sell a product to attorneys in India, where the attorneys are going to be speaking English, but they'll be speaking it with all variety of different Indian accent, different Indian dialects accented English, if that makes sense. And they said, can you work well with that? Well, we have done some work on that, so we have a good Indian accented English model. But if they want it specifically for attorneys, well, maybe we would excuse me, maybe we would work with them to collect some more data, collect some text data for training a statistical language model on the legal language of Indian courts or attorneys or whatever, contract law. We would maybe work with them to collect some data. And so the guy I was talking to said, "Oh yeah, that's no problem. We have hundreds or thousands of hours of recordings from other people we've worked with in the past." And we say, "Okay, great. Let's we'll do that." So usually our customers bring some data to us. Sometimes they don't, and we have to go scramble and find some data. But there are a lot of sources, open data sources out there today, and many of them, maybe most of them, are without commercial limitations, so that even a for-profit company like ours can use them. So, but the question, the answer to your question, I think, is, yeah, we always are worried about data, as you might expect. Over the years, we've collected enough data from different projects we worked on that we do pretty well now. But any new project, if it's some niche thing in a particular industry, or for people with a particular accent, or in a novel language, we have to do something. Let me tell you one project that we're doing right now. I think I hinted at this earlier. One of the other schools that I went to besides UCSC was Brigham Young University, and they have a lot of language programs. They have a lot of people who are majoring in some very underrepresented languages, and in their Asian languages department, they have a group that is collecting and recording and transcribing oral histories from people in Cambodia who survived the Khmer Rouge, and so they have 4,000 hours, I think, that they've recorded of people speaking in Cambodian with pretty good quality recordings, and then they've transcribed 1,000 hours of that. So they have 1,000 hours of transcribed recordings, and they asked if we could help them build ASR, speech recognition, to help transcribe the rest of it, at least get drafts on the rest of it, or help them index it or whatever. And we said, well, sure, if your students can do most of the work. So, because they didn't have any money to pay us, we said, well, we'll do this just as a humanitarian pro bono kind of project. If your students will do most of the work, and we'll mentor them. And so now for the last 5 months, we've been working with them, with their students. And the students are working on it to get experience and academic credit and so forth, and they're getting paid too, I think, from the school. They got some money for that. But it's a partnership between us and the school to develop the first good quality Cambodian ASR system. I'm kind of excited about that. And so we're always looking for opportunities. And we're doing it hoping that, well, maybe one day we'll be able to sell that. There'll be some commercial use for it, but maybe not. We're still happy to be working on it.
All
right. Go ahead.
Jeff, I had one more question on the previous slide. What is the state of the art of incremental speech recognition, in the sense that like in a real human conversation, right? If you're talking with somebody, like the other speaker will often, let's say, confirm something that you've said, in the middle of, as you're saying it, right? So this would mean that, and I think I've seen, I've heard of people try to do this with ASR in the past, but I don't know. I was just wondering if you knew if either your system or any of the other existing ASR systems would be able to do something like this.
Yeah, so this is like, in fact, while you were speaking 2 or 3 times, I found myself saying, yeah, in the middle
Exactly. Yeah.
I didn't wait for you to stop. And you just
Right.
said yeah, exactly
Yes. Yes.
again. And that's considered polite. That's not considered an interruption in you know, in our social customs. And so specifically, what are you asking? Can we like recognize when people are doing that, or can we recognize the difference between an interruption, you know, a rude interruption, and one of these back channel comments, or what? Because those are different questions about, you know, what exactly do you want to do with that?
Well, specifically, is the ASR fast enough to kind of know when to confirm, for example, if it wanted to?
Yeah. Oh, I see that the ASR might say, yeah,
Yeah.
well, you're in the middle of speaking.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know anyone that does that. I don't know that anyone has really tackled that. That feels like a really good academic problem that some, you know, budding PhD students should look at. But I think it's fast enough. The problem, I mean, it's fast enough in the sense of processing power. We can recognize speech about 10 or 20 times faster than real time on a typical processor. And in fact, if we needed to, we could go much faster than that. But just in sort of streaming speech recognition, let's say it's a factor of 10, that we can recognize it 10 times faster. A problem is that you don't always know. It's hard to do that. The NLU is also not horribly time consuming, but sometimes you need more context. You need context in the future to like figure out whether you are on the right track, you know, whether you do understand, to give those kind of cues. Anyway, if you, Adwait, if you were a company coming to me and you had money and you said, I want to build a speech NLP interface that would give this kind of back channel, yeah, right, kinds of cues as you're speaking, I would say, yeah, we can work on that problem. As it is right now, I don't know anyone who has considered it important enough to tackle, because it is hard. You have to, yeah, it is hard to think exactly how would you do that without the system feeling awkward. I think if I don't expect that from my personal assistant, you know, from my Alexa. If my Alexa started saying, yeah, in the middle of me talking to her, I think it might put me off.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is that it came up in the context of years ago. There were a lot of people working on travel reservation systems, both on the speech and NL side. Yeah. And I remember we actually got logs of a travel agent talking with the real customer, because our thinking was like, let's just design the system that a real travel agent would do it.
Oh, right.
When we looked closely at the transcribed logs, we found that they were all full of this back channel and confirmation that we at that time had no idea how to do in an automated way. So right. So at that point, like, you know, we all punted on that problem and kind of focused on just the more basic problems. But I feel it's we always felt at that time that at some point when the systems got good enough that it would be, you know, it would be nice to kind of have that to simulate what a real agent or a real human would say. But
well, I like that I like that as a good problem to work at. I think there has to be a good application for someone to fund the development of that work.
Sure.
Or it's going to be an academic project.
Sure.
All right, cool. Let me jump ahead. I'm going to tell you now. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here's a picture. This is 1,000 words describing how speech recognition works. So there are 3 components. I'm oversimplifying, but I think when you explain something, you should oversimplify, and then you can straighten people out afterwards if didn't appreciate that it was a little more complicated than this. But there are three main components to recognizing speech. So you get the speech in, and then we have a component called the acoustic model, and the entire job of the acoustic model is to identify phonemes in the speech signal. So I'm going to say, oh, over here that looks like an ah, over here that looks like an a, that looks like a t, or whatever. And so you'll look at the different parts of the speech and you'll identify different phonemes that it might be. Now, it doesn't do that perfectly accurately, and that's not the goal. The goal is to say, here at this point, it matches 60%. It matches 40%. It matches e 5%. It matches t 0%. Whatever. So that at any point in the signal, you can tell it how likely it is that a certain phoneme is being produced at that point in time. So the acoustic model represents the connection between the signal and the phonemes. And then we have a lexicon where we have all the words that we think people might speak, and each word we know what is the sequence of phonemes that makes up that word. So you can think of the lexicon as the link between phoneme sequences and words. So if I saw, the acoustic model is going to say, here's where I see phonemes, and then the lexicon will look at that output and say, oh, well, here, I see some words there. And then the language model knows how to put words together into coherent phrases or commands or whatever. The language model or the grammar, those are sort of equivalent terms. We sometimes use the term language model if it's a statistical grammar without a lot of constraints on explicit constraints on word order or whatever, and a grammar usually implies that there's some constraints there. And then, so there's these three components that if you think about it, the three of them provide this chain all the way from the speech signal to the sequence of words that are being recognized. And the recognizer, the engine, is the thing that orchestrates all three of those together simultaneously, taking speech input and producing a most likely sequence of words as the output. And about 10, 11, 12, 13 years ago, there was a revolution that I mentioned already before on the acoustic model in particular, where people realized you could use deep neural networks. Have you talked about those, or is that a familiar topic to people here?
Yeah, they should have seen. Yeah, they should have seen them before.
Yeah. So using deep neural networks to model the acoustic model. Before that, we used Gaussian mixture models or something else. But with deep neural networks, we were able to represent a lot more of the variation, speaker variation, accent variation, noise variation, things like that. And so that was a kind of a revolution. And there have not been huge revolutions. There have been smaller revolutions in other components here. But maybe sometime soon there'll be a big revolution on language modeling or whatever. Now language modeling, well, never mind. I won't get into that. That's I spent the first 13, 14 years of my career focused exclusively on statistical language modeling, and I have kind of a love and a passion for it, and it's really frustrating that it's really hard to do much better than pretty stupid, simple trigram or n-gram models. Anyway, recent successes in speech technology hinge on modeling these deep and hidden connections in language, primarily in the acoustic models, but we also use DNNs in language models as well these days. Okay, so you guys probably have an intuition for this, but a lot of people that I talk to don't. And people ask me, well, speech is a solved problem. So I should be able to do, whatever. And we have to explain, no, it's not a solved problem. All applications that we have are going to have some errors. And the key is to design your problem, design the setup so that as much of it as possible is easy. So that, for example, well, here I present 5 dimensions here. What's the size of the vocabulary? What's the noise level of the environment? How far away is the microphone from the speaker? How spontaneous is the speech? How many different speakers are you trying to recognize with the same models, and so forth. So there are more, but I've just listed these 5. But I'll tell you, 20 years ago, when one of the main success stories in speech recognition was voice dialing, you could pick up your phone, even an old feature phone, and say, "Call mom," or call my dentist, or whatever. And that worked pretty well, but that was because all of those things were over on the easy side. It was very small vocabulary. It was maybe, however many people are in your contacts, plus the digits, plus, a few other words. Maybe it's 100 words, something like that. So it was a small vocabulary, usually relatively quiet environment. The person is definitely speaking very close to the microphone. They're speaking deliberately and carefully because they know they're speaking to a computer. And it's, one person is using the phone all the time. It's not like a kiosk in a mall that different people are coming up to and talking about. So that's all, everything's on the easy side, and we were able to do that. So when Siri came out, or similar Dragon Naturally Speaking, or some other kinds of products, one of the main areas that they pushed over to the right that they could solve was this idea of being a much larger vocabulary. So now with Siri, I routinely dictate messages or emails using Siri, or if you've got an Android, using Google's voice features, and it can handle relatively noisy environments. But still, if you're talking to Siri, you're generally talking near the microphone. You're speaking deliberately and carefully to be understood, and it's a fixed known speaker. If I pick up my wife's phone and try to talk, it doesn't understand me, because it has really adapted to my voice. So you see, we sort of could push 1 or 2 of these things over to the right. And then with Amazon Echo, the main thing that we were able to push over to the right was that third line, that now you can speak much further away from the microphone. It was also pretty good in noise, at least household kind of noise. But people are still speaking deliberately and carefully. When I speak to Alexa, I definitely enunciate much more carefully than if I'm just talking to my wife or a friend or someone like that. And with Echo, now we can handle a few speakers in the household, but it's not everybody in the world at the same time. Anyway, so we pushed things a little further over. One of the hardest problems in speech processing is meeting transcription. So with meeting transcription, imagine that you want to, people say this to me all the time. I get requests for this, I swear, at least 1 a month from a different person every month. They want to take a cell phone and put it on the middle of a table or at the front of the room in a classroom or whatever. And then at the end of the meeting, they want an accurate transcript of what everyone said, who said what were all the action items, what were all the things we had to pay attention to, and so forth. And if you think about it, that's like everything's over on the right-hand side. And nobody has really solved that problem. There are people who are working on that, but that's a hard problem. There's a reason that no one has produced a product to do that yet, that will just transcribe all your meetings by putting your phone on the table. And the reason I bring this up is that is you guys in your careers are going to be faced with some challenges, and you'll have to pick your battles. So sometimes you'll say, oh, okay, well, this project, like if someone asked me to do meeting transcription, as I say, they do. The first thing I say is, okay, what can we do to make it easier? Can we ask everyone in the room to have their own microphone? Can everyone use their own phone? And we somehow network all the phones to get a giant array microphone, or can I get the agenda for the meeting ahead of time, or can I get a transcription of all the slides that are being presented in the meeting, and what time you're presenting which slides and what the words are on the. But you want to think about how can you cheat. I don't mean cheat in a bad, shameful way. I mean, how can you make the problem easier? What can you do to sort of bring the problem shift it over to the left to make it easier? And so that's, pick your battles. If someone wants you to do a very hard, tackle a very hard problem, that's great. We like hard problems. We like tackling them, but don't try to solve like 3 things at the same time. See if you can solve them one at a time. Find a way to make some other aspects of the project or the problem easier.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Another example I can think of a problem that has all of these vectors in the hard dimension or like direction would be like covert audio recording, like for use of like advertisement. And so because I'm pretty sure I'm convinced it exists and is being used against me at every moment. But I just wanted to ask, like, how much work is being put into that front from your perspective?
I don't know anyone working on that. I've actually tried to persuade some people to hire us to work on that. Right. I want I've suggested to some retail outlets to say, look, you should put microphones in your store and hear what people are saying about the products and use that for how to place the products, how to advertise them or whatever. But I've never been able to persuade anyone to do that. So Austin, it might be that people are working on that, but I'm not aware of anyone working on that. And it is, as you point out, a very hard problem. In that case, if someone asked me to work on that, I might say, well, okay, I'm not going to try to recognize everything completely and accurately, but I want at least to get enough to get a sentiment that are they happy? What is the product they're talking about, and are they happy about it, or something like that? But it's really hard. That's a really hard.
Another question or comment would be like in the way you're speaking, it sounds to me that you're focused highly on like, what would it take to do this? How much would it cost? Why would you want to do this? Like all these like bigger picture items, and like in your like responsibilities at Cobalt, are you involved in some of like the technique, like the more like lower like actual coding or like developing? Or are you more focused on like figuring out how to?
No, that's all we do at Cobalt. So there's me and a couple of managers at Cobalt or a couple of business development people that ask these questions like, well, should we take this project on or whatever? But then once we take a project on, we've got 15 or so people here who they are writing code all day, and they're training models, and they are testing this and testing that and looking for data and whatever. So yeah, we spend most of our time in the weeds, actually building stuff, trying to solve these problems.
Cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I love my job.
Your perspective is interesting in that, like, sure, we can do that, but that's like expensive. And like, do you want us to do that? And like, why? So yeah, it hasn't been framed to me that way yet. So that's what I was asking.
Yeah, well, that's right. But I think it is important to realize there are hard problems out there. And and we can do them all, but we have to make sure that there are a lot of companies who've gone broke because they didn't carefully think about, well, can we get there?
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that you're taking steps that you can afford.
Cool.
And then we still want to get to the end. It was, one of the nicest things at Amazon was when I said, this is really hard. And they said, we are the richest company in the world. Hire anyone you want, take as long as you want, just solve it. And I thought, wow, that was great. I don't have to worry about the cost or the budget or whatever. And went out and grew the team. And that's kind of Amazon's approach still. I mean, I was impressed that they let me hire like 65, PhD speech NLP kinds of researchers. But after I left, I know they've like hired 10 times as many. They have, I think, easily the largest collection of people working on speech and NLP problems in the industry. All right, so I'm coming into the home stretch here on my talk here. So I'm going to come back to this question of predicting the future. So 15 years ago, we predicted that there would be improvements in the existing technology, and that's true. But it misses the greater arc of everything else that's going on that has influenced the way technology has evolved. And today, I predict we're going to get better at our existing technology. But what is that greater arc that we don't really know what's going on? What's around the bend in the road, out of our headlights, out of our view, that we don't really know what's. Let me tell you more concretely. I am going to claim that the future is in our blind spot. 15 years ago, nobody would have predicted smartphones, or at least nobody I knew was thinking about smartphones. That was just such a crazy idea that you'd walk around with, the power of a laptop in your pocket, and you'd use it you'd call it a phone. They were only invented like 12 years ago, when the iPhone first came out. Nobody knew about deep neural networks and how that was going to affect things and what doors that would open. Nobody knew that conversational assistants would become so prevalent. So if if 15 years ago you had predicted the future, you would have thought, oh, I'll get better at dictating my emails or something like that. And you would not have thought about all the other uses of speech and all the other the ways that it has evolved. And it's not just because of the technology. It's because of, all sorts of different people with all sorts of different roles help shape that future. So the information about where we're going is partly driven by speech scientists and NLP researchers and experts and so forth, but it's also driven by entrepreneurs who have a vision for a product and want to and convince investors to invest in it and then fund it. It's driven by consumers and what they will accept or embrace or not, and how much they'll pay for it. It's driven by hardware constraints and hardware issues. It's driven by social movements and issues like data privacy and are companies keeping your data to improve their systems and so forth. There could be backlashes in areas that then shift the direction we're going in a dramatic way. So there's all these different parties. I didn't include on here legislators and governments and all sorts of people. And I'm sure the pandemic has influenced speech technology in certain ways. I know it has. And there's no way anyone would have predicted that. So the problem is that the future is being determined by so many different people in so many different roles that it's hard for anyone in any one particular role to know where that's going. And I believe it's impossible to see beyond the near term, what our headlights are showing us in the very near term. I started my talk with a quote from Yogi Berra, the baseball player. I want to wrap up with a quote from Friedrich Hayek, an econometrist, who in his case he was talking about the stock market and the idea that nobody can predict where the stock market is going, because all this information about what's going to rise and what's going to fall and what's going to succeed, what's going to fail, all of that information is held by so many different people, and it's essentially dispersed. It's not possible to bring it together. That in fact, the most efficient way to combine all that information to see where we're going is probably just to let it play out, and the world is its own simulator, and it will unfold in a certain way. And so what I say is we're going to see the future when it gets here, and to remember that we get to help steer where we want it to go. So you're playing a role. You're not passive. You get to nudge the system in important ways. Now, I said a minute ago that that speech recognition is in a dramatically different place because of hidden and subtle connections that are represented, for example, in these connectionist models, these DNNs and so forth. And I think as a metaphor, that makes sense, that the future is being written not by individuals, but by these networks of individuals. It's written by the networks of all of us who are playing a different role and doing different things. No one of us sees the whole picture, but we're all working together to create it. That I want to encourage you to grow your network, nurture your network. You never know what connections are going to lead to the next breakthrough, or that may be a breakthrough for you personally. It may be a breakthrough in some fundamental part of the technology. Think about your role in defining the future of speech or NLP technology and technology in general. And I welcome you to reach out to me, to each other, to your professors, to anyone, to talk about ideas that you have for how we can create the future, what we can do. And so with that, I'll just invite you to drop me a line if you'd like, connect to me on LinkedIn. And I value my network and appreciate the time that you guys have spent listening to me. And so that's all I've got.
Wow, thanks, Jeff, for a really interesting talk. We still have a few minutes for general discussion. Any questions for the speaker?
I had a question about that like 3-step speech recognition model you mentioned. So
Yeah.
Is there like a feedback kind of stage from the language model back to the acoustic model? Because I've heard that like sometimes based on more likely phrases that you would have based off the language model, that would affect the earlier stages. But I'm just wondering sort of how that happens.
Yeah. So in fact, it was. You know what? Let me get back to that slide. And where is it here? Right. Are you seeing the slide there?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So in fact, it looks here like I'm saying that first the acoustic model identifies a bunch of phonemes. Then the lexicon identifies a bunch of words. Then the language model extracts phrases out of those. But in fact, the whole thing is being done synchronously. So there's not just a feedback mechanism. The whole thing is synchronous. That at any point in time, you're looking for how to project the next phoneme that makes sense with the words that you're in the middle of maybe creating, that makes sense within the phrase that you might be creating. And so yeah, it's more than just a feedback loop from the right to the left. The whole thing's being done in concert, in synchrony.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right.
Any further questions for the speaker?
Yeah, I had more of a general question.
Yeah.
So what was that like when you finally like discovered that there was a solution to that, like, to the problem of, like when you were working with Amazon,
Yeah.
like what was that like actually like coming up with a solution or like finding that there was one?
That it was it was a huge relief because I was under a lot of pressure to deliver this, and I was not sure. I didn't. We hadn't done it. I didn't know, was this going to take us 10 years? Was Amazon going to get tired of it? They said, take as long as you want, but that's, you wonder, are they going to give up after a couple of years if we haven't made progress? And so and it didn't happen all at once. The results started coming in, and we would say, oh, we were able to improve the accuracy by a few percent, and we have some more things to try. Oh, and we'll so it came in, gradually over a long period of time, but it was really, I want to say exciting, but exciting might imply that it happened all at once. That it was thrilling to sort of want to be part of that and to watch that come together and to be part of developing something that hadn't been done before, and that we could see had important consequences. Actually, can I just comment on that? I say it had important consequences. We didn't really know at Amazon that it was going to have that anyone was going to care at all about Alexa and the Echo products. We had a sister product. We were in this super secretive group working on secret projects, and we had a sister project working on another super secretive project, which was the Amazon Fire phone. I don't know if you remember that Amazon launched a phone maybe 7 years ago, and so everybody assumed that the phone was going to be a huge hit, and everyone would want the Amazon Fire phone, and it would take over from everyone else. It would be the most exciting phone on the market, and they thought that the Alexa kind of thing was just going to be a passing novelty. And so, like when these two products were announced a few months apart, Jeff Bezos himself announced the Fire phone with big fanfare and a big press conference and whatever. When they announced the Alexa a little bit later, it was a small, subdued press release that Jeff Bezos wasn't anywhere to be seen. In fact, not even someone who reported to Jeff Bezos. It was like 2 steps down from Jeff Bezos announced the Alexa and so forth. And we had none of us in either of those two groups. I think we were all shocked and surprised that, in fact, the Fire phone flamed out and was a huge failure and a huge disappointment. And the Alexa just caught on and became the dominant, voice interface device. So that again highlights what I was saying before about how it's so hard to predict the future of what's gonna take, what's not. I mean, these were people who had invested hundreds, thousands of people who had invested their years into building these two devices were just like fundamentally wrong on the relative success of each one of those.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It seems really interesting for sure hearing the phone aspect as well, and how they were expecting that to do so much better. So it's definitely interesting to hear like kind of the expectations and like the end product of everything. Yeah, and how like even how long it took you guys to even get to like that type of solution.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, good. Any further questions? I have one. Can you say something about the privacy issues that came up when Alexa was first introduced? People thought that the speaker was kind of uploading their everyday conversations, and I'm not. I don't know what the reality of that was, but maybe it'd be interesting to hear your perspective.
Sure, I'll tell you what the reality of that was, and
Okay.
I presume still is, although
Okay.
I've been gone from Amazon for 6 years, so
Okay.
who knows? They might have changed. But this was an interesting part of what we had to develop. We had to develop 2 speech recognizers. On the device itself, embedded in the device, was a small speech recognizer that was simply listening for the word Alexa, and that's all. And whenever it heard Alexa, it would take that speech plus whatever followed it until there was some silence and send it up to the cloud for further processing. And so in the cloud, then we had the speech recognition going on that would then recognize that utterance. And if it determined that that utterance was not a meaningful command, like if it was just someone talking about, I bought a new Alexa yesterday or whatever, if it determined that it wasn't a command, it would just throw the audio away. So first of all, the only stuff that was ever sent up to the cloud was anything that sounded like Alexa with whatever followed it immediately.
Okay.
Until you had a pause, and that's all. And then what got sent up to the cloud was that, and then it would get discarded if it didn't pass a further round of testing of, does whatever they said afterwards make sense? I was a relatively senior person there, but even I did not have access to listen to any of the recordings that came through. There was a team of people who kind of were kept separate from some of the other processing that would just listen to utterances, listen to commands, make sure that we got them correct, for the feedback loop to keep training it. But Amazon was super, super careful about protecting customer privacy and who could access those audios.
Was that
Okay.
for well, I have an echo. Why is that?
Why?
No, I'll just ask it. Was the motivation for that moral or legal?
Both. Amazon prides. I don't want to feel like I'm cheerleading for Amazon. I like Amazon fine, but I'm not speaking for them. But Amazon has always been a very customer-centric company, and they didn't want to do anything that could ever make customers feel that they had betrayed them or they had sold them out or anything like that. So it was very important to Amazon to treat customers with respect and treat their data with respect, and so it was. I guess you could call that moral or legal. I mean, you don't want a customer to sue you. You don't want something to whatever. But it was more just they wanted to keep customers happy at all costs and not run the risk of offending a customer over any particular thing.
Yeah. I still feel that you could keep any sort of privacy violation relatively secret. Or is that? Yeah.
I mean, so look, I'll be honest. Amazon does save again, I don't know what they're doing today, but at the time, the plan was to save all of the recordings of all of the commands that people give to Alexa, and go back and analyze them, find which ones we got wrong, tweak the system, retrain the models with good feedback there. But and so I'm not saying that Amazon doesn't keep your data. They do keep your data, but they protect it super, super carefully, so that it's not like people are passing around, oh look, I heard in the background of this someone was saying a command, I heard in the background, I heard someone fart. Look, isn't that funny? Let's share that with our friends. that kind of thing would never, if anyone did that, they'd be fired on the spot at Amazon.
But there has been like data leakage issues at Amazon, right? Where like some users' data has gotten into other users' data, and they've like people have requested it, and that like they end up getting transcripts that weren't necessarily theirs, but from another Amazon user. So like that.
It wouldn't surprise me that there were bugs like that, but I'm sure that was unintentional and was something that Amazon regretted. I'm not familiar, Angela, with that particular case, but yeah.
You mentioned that you were working with speech recognition models for Cambodian. I was just sort of wondering if there's like structural differences between how that works between different languages, and whether like having a different phonemic inventory or like different syllable structure might change the way you process those kinds of languages.
Yeah, fortunately, the way most of our models are set up right now, we're not using anything about like English. We're not using any assumptions about English or Indo-European languages in the way we structure our models. As long as you can break down the speech in terms of something like phonemes and they string together into something like lexical units, and those string together into phrases, you're okay. And that could be, it could be a tonal language like Thai or Mandarin. It could be a click language like are common in parts of Africa, or other. It could be any, there's the world's languages are a wonderful, diverse set. And it's fascinating to think about them all. But I don't know of any linguistic things that fundamentally throw a wrench in just the overall architecture that we use. There are things in different languages that you have to take into account, that when you're training a model for like Hebrew or Arabic, the vowels are often missing, and so you have to go, you have to go hallucinate the vowels. You have to figure out where do the vowels belong in there, or in languages like French, where there's 8 different versions of every verb and they sound identical, but when you spell them, you're supposed to spell them right. You have to do some disambiguation there. So every language has some things that make it interesting, but I think the basic approach is pretty consistent across languages.
Cool. Yeah, that's super cool to hear. I haven't really heard multilingual perspectives on speech recognition before, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the things I like is what we have to do with different languages. We're just getting ready to start training Turkish speech recognition, and Turkish is one of those languages similar to Finnish or Korean or Russian or others. It's agglutinative. That is, the idea of what a word is a little bit funny, because the words are have all sorts of prefixes and suffixes that get stacked onto it, and you can't put all of those individually separately into your lexical inventory. So you got to figure out a way to approach it morphologically or something.
Wow. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I can imagine with like languages with different structures, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any further questions for the speaker? I think we're running at towards the end of our time slot. Any further quick questions? Going once, going twice. Okay.
You guys have been great. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks again, Jeff. I think this was great I think it was great for the students to hear your vast experience in this area. So I'm really glad you could spend some time and give us a talk.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Great.
Anytime.
Great. Okay. All right. Okay. Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. We'll see you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.